Chapter 28. Dippy's First Pet. And so the days of hiding out in the wilderness continued for Harry, Billy the Kid Spider, and Johnny Wild Bill Hiccup Dipp, as they'd now dubbed themselves. And at last, with more error than trial, they'd actually gotten the rabbit traps to work, so fresh meat was now on the menu. The first time they'd skinned a rabbit was quite a traumatic experience, but their hunger had driven them to it. But after a while, it became second nature. You might not think it, but if you had to do the same, then you would. Because not so many generations ago, people like you and I only knew how to live in that way. Another development was that Dippy's nightmares had now virtually stopped. It seemed Harry was right again, in that simply talking about them had eased them, and they'd both agreed that when they returned to civilization, the very second thing they'd do would be to track down Jim, Dippy's father. In fact, immediately after Harry had seen Victoria, of course. She would be so impressed with the way he'd cured Dippy. My God, what a guy he was. Then Harry said to himself, "Let's not go overboard here though. I'm not saying I'm Superman or anything. God, no, I'm not. But everybody else will. Yep, it's all going to plan." Harry and Dippy had kept themselves occupied reasonably well with activities such as fishing, hunting and gathering, and raiding the occasional farm for fresh milk and eggs. And they'd actually managed to survive out there for an extraordinary length of time. Well, 2 days and 2 nights, and that makes 4. But it was now late August, and although the days were still warm, the nights were getting chillier, and soon their wild food supply would grow lower, and they would have no choice but to return. Though Harry was having an uneasy and reoccurring thought. He couldn't understand why nobody had come looking for them. Maybe nobody cared, he would often think. But that couldn't be it, because of course they cared. They must just be better at hiding than the average person. Yes, that was definitely it. Most of the time, Harry thought about Victoria. He hadn't seen her since that day at her house, when he had jumped from the bathroom window with no trousers on. He'd figured that she only said all those nasty things to her mother to get what she wanted, because nobody could have pretended to like somebody that well, and looking back now, that was obvious. The emotional turmoil was eating him up though, and it was getting worse every day, as there really wasn't much else to think about, and Harry knew that he had to go back soon, as by now Victoria must really be missing him, that poor, poor girl. Then suddenly, on the very last day of August, the weather turned. The longest and hottest summer in Britain's history came to an abrupt end. The days had started to get noticeably shorter, so the hours of hunting and gathering had been greatly reduced. They'd managed to catch a couple of fish that day, so that was supper taken care of. But they now had no food reserves left, and because it was too cold to be outside in the evening, as soon as twilight came, they had no choice but to retire to the tent. The greatest summer ever was now over. On that night, there was a full moon, and Harry watched the ghostly shadows of the trees that were cast on the tent wall as they rocked back and forth in the breeze. And yet again he thought about Victoria. Only this time he knew he had reached the limit. "I have to see her. I can't stand it any longer, and it has to be tomorrow," he decided, as there was now no way that he could stop himself. He'd been there long enough and had proved beyond any doubt what a great guy that he was. He laid back and imagined the scenario of their meeting again, probably for the 1000th time, only now there was nothing left to imagine, so all he could do was close his eyes and sleep, a dreamless sleep. In the morning, Harry got up very early to watch the sunrise and mentally prepare himself to break the news to Dippy. He practiced his speech over and over, and by the end of it, he was sure that Dippy would understand. They simply couldn't stay out here any longer. Their situation was becoming hopeless. They had to act, and sooner rather than later. So Harry decided to go for one last walk in the woods to say farewell and to summon up the courage to tell Dippy. It was breezy again, only now the breeze wasn't welcomed. It was chilly and unfriendly, and continuously hissed through the trees like an angry snake. Harry wandered further away from camp, further than he ever had before. He could see the dry stone wall that marked the edge of the woods. His feet squelched in the mud as he walked. It was a depressing sound. The weather had created a new scenery that was now gloomy, and it had all started to close in on him. But then, a big surprise, and a sight for sore and even hungrier eyes. Dippy arose some time after Harry and was cleaning his teeth in the now swollen stream. Everything in the camp was sodden, and he was having difficulty lighting the fire. It was so disheartening. He sat there contemplating their situation and was mentally preparing himself to break some bad news to Harry. The fire eventually roared into life and warmed his chilled body, and he practiced his speech to Harry over and over again. And by the end of it, he was sure that he'd understand. They simply couldn't stay out here any longer. Their situation was becoming desperate. They had to act sooner rather than later, and he hoped that Harry would understand. He just had to summon up the courage to tell him. Then Harry suddenly appeared, and Dippy gasped. "Oh, what the f... "Look what I found," smiled Harry. "It's a cow," said Dippy, stating the obvious. "Yep, but it's no ordinary cow, Dippy lad." "It's not?" "Nope, because this cow is breakfast, dinner, tea, and supper, all rolled into one," smiled Harry, like the cat that had got the cream and the canary. "Where in God's name did you get that, Harry?" "It was just standing there, right in front of me." "That truly is a gift from the gods," beamed Dippy. "It is that, Dippy lad, it is that," agreed Harry, and he patted the cow on the rump, and it mooed right on cue. And for the first time in many days, they both actually laughed. With their new-found food supply, their moods had improved immeasurably. So Harry decided to stay an extra few days. It was the least he could do for Dippy. It was amazing what the thought of fresh meat could do to a person. Harry smiled to himself and thought, I wonder what Victoria would think of me eating the cow. She couldn't use a vegetarian argument against me now, because if we didn't eat the cow, we would starve. And he smiled at the irony of it all, and how they both would laugh when they met again. There was a slight problem, though. The cow was actually still very much alive. They discussed slaughtering her. Not her, it. But with no decision reached on when, and more pointedly, how the deed would be done. So Harry decided to broach the subject again, but this time he would make sure that there would be a more decisive outcome. He sauntered over to Dippy and sat beside him. So, Johnny, I reckon it's time for beef a la Tinker's Woods tonight. Don't you think so? Oh, do we have to, Harry? I mean, yes, we have to. But what I meant was, do we have to today? You said that yesterday, Johnny lad. Yeah, I know, but, well, it's just, Come on, spit it out. Well, it's just that she's kind of cute looking. Cute? What do you mean, cute? I mean, not she. It's a bloody cow, for God's sake. Yeah, I'll grant you that, Harry. But she's our cow. Harry was outraged. He'd had enough of this sentimental nonsense. He had to eat, and this had to be done. He was so angry, he leapt to his feet and grabbed a heavy stick, and before Dippy could even react, he was over by the cow. He raised the stick high above his head and prepared to strike. This was it. The cow would be on a plate very soon. He just needed to steady his aim. He had to get it right first time. It had to be an instant death, so it, wouldn't suffer. The time was right, and the time was right now. Beef at last. Lovely, juicy beef. There was nothing like it. Yes, beef is good. And I'll have some beef, please. Prepare to meet thy doom, yelled Harry, and he raised the stick even higher. His primal instincts had been stirred, and he was now Man the Hunter. That cow knew the natural order of things, and all she could do was stare at him with her big brown eyes and accept her fate. Harry's arms were now aching, as he'd been stood there for a good few minutes, and the stick had started to shake. The cow batted her eyes, and Harry wavered, but not for long, as he held the stick even firmer and with more conviction, because he was the superior being. But then the cow started to cry. Well, not really cry, but she did look upset. Her eyes pleaded with him. "Don't kill me and eat me, young man," she didn't say, but it seemed like she did. "I'm your friend, and you don't eat your friends, do you?" she seemingly didn't add. "Well, I'm not your friend, you stupid cow. I was only pretending to be." "You are my friend. I know you are," continued the cow, but only with her eyes and facial expressions. Dippy was sat watching, and was perplexed, to say the least. "Please," begged the cow in facial expression language. "No!" wailed Harry. So then she mooed. Moo! She knew what she was doing all right, the sly cow. And Harry had no choice but to relent, and he dropped the stick to the floor, and that was the end of that. Shit. You know what this means now? I'm a bloody vegetarian. Harry turned quickly to Dippy before he changed his mind. "Do you want to keep the cow, Johnny?" "Oh, can I?" said Dippy, smiling his widest smile. Harry patted her on the rump. "Well, you might as well. At least we'll have a good supply of milk." Dippy jumped to his feet and stroked the cow's neck. He'd never owned a pet before, so this was a major milestone in his life. "You're going to have to look after her though, Johnny." "Of course." "And you're going to have to take her for walks." "That goes without saying." "You're going to have to see to her if she moves in the night." "Absolutely." "OK then, Johnny lad, she's all yours." "Ah, that's fantastic, Harry. We're going to have to think of a name for him, though." "You mean her," corrected Harry. "Oh, yeah, her." Then Harry had an idea. "Johnny, can I name her?" "Yeah, of course you can, Harry." Excellent. The antics of Johnny Dipp and Mrs. Simpkins the cow had kept Harry amused for a short while, especially her training. It wasn't going great, though. The teaching of Fetch the Stick was good entertainment, but like everything else out there, it soon became repetitive. Every remark or joke was used several times, then several times more, and then too many times. Harry was now officially stir crazy, and it was time for him to leave.